Hey, hey, hey. Can you hear me?
I can. I'm
Yes.
here.
Welcome, welcome, welcome to the BlackPrint, all things of the dynasty, right? Like
Okay.
building our dynasties. Y'all know I love legacy. I am super duper excited today to be here with a friend, a colleague, a sister warrior in business, in the spirit, you name it. Miss Crystal Berger. I'm super duper excited to dig in because of, just in the years that we've known each other, the transitions that I've seen you make, the hurdles and the obstacles that you have overcome, and not just overcoming, y'all, because a lot of us overcoming, we look like we done overcame, like he's overcoming stuff and looking fabulous, traveling worldwide, dominating. So I'm excited to dig in and to really help someone see that no matter that we can always pivot, we can always adjust, and hopefully find friendly spaces and places in industries that people may want to move into. So with that being said, I don't want to give your introduction, but I do want you to tell our audience who you are and just a little bit more about who Berger is, and why should anyone even care what you have to say?
Oh, well, well, one, thank you, Quintaria, for bringing me, inviting me to the Black Print. I mean, everything that you're doing around legacy is critical to the growth of not just the Black community, but the U.S. economy overall, right? And understanding that what we bring to these spaces, not only is it ingenious and innovative, but more importantly, it adds to the bottom line, right?
Yes.
And so I think that sometimes that gets lost in the conversation. So I wanted to bring that early is that Black business, we are the Black people in the US. Literally, if we were to take all our consumer dollars off the table, we would be the 16th wealthiest nation in the world,
Say
right?
that.
you know
Say
and so
that.
when you think about that data point, right, we have to understand that Black people are at the essence and the core of the US economy, and us being in business and our businesses thriving is critical to the success of our society overall. So that's that. I wanted to get that out there early, in the conversation, and kind of just looking at data points. Anybody can go to crystalberger.com. They can look me up. They can Google me, ChatGPT, whatever. Long
Hmm.
story short, worked in network news for a decade as a senior booking producer and a national feature host. So I booked over 140,000 guest segments during my time in network news. Was on 1,300 stations nationwide as a host and a producer. So I had a feature that aired on Sirius XM, Fox News 24/7 headlines, and in that process of being like a gatekeeper, I saw a lot of deficiencies in the newsroom or inefficiencies. And so when the pandemic hit, and we'll talk about how you encouraged me to pivot, Crystal, not, it's time, right? And knowing
Hmm.
how timing is critical in building and executing your vision. But long story short, now I have a technology company that has automated those newsroom processes. But when it all comes down to it, I'm just a girl from West Baltimore, born and raised, in More, at the core, not Baltimore County, Baltimore City.
Thank you,
And I'm
because they trying to differentiate now, baby. Like they
and
trying to
I'm proud, yeah,
differentiate.
and I'm proud of that. To be able to say that, I came from a community that was primarily Black. Had great community, aunties, uncles, mother, father, and so I'm just a girl from West Baltimore deciding to change the world. That kind of thing.
Yeah. And I love that about you. I live in Baltimore now, but I grew up in Detroit. So I felt like when we first met, that was another commonality coming from sister cities. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and I want to speak to it. It wasn't on my notes or anything, but I do. When you said growing up in a chocolate city where you look to the left and you look to the right and people look like you, I had that same experience. And I believe it shaped me in one of the most powerful ways, that even my children, and seeing how different their upbringing was, being in a not so, like they were kind of like the fly in the milk, whereas I was, like surrounded by cocoa and caramel and all, and all of that. But for me, it had a profound effect on my confidence, on for me, I knew at a young age that I could conquer the world, and I could, because my mayor looked like me, because the fire
Mm-hmm.
chief looked like me. Growing up in Baltimore, in West Baltimore in particular, what do you think you gained that, or some skills and the assets that you're taking into the world straight from West Baltimore?
Well, it's what you said, Quintaria, right? It's the confidence. Sometimes we think that, we're improving our race or ourselves by, integrating in certain communities, but we know that there are layers to that. Like, you may have more access to certain educational resources and things of that nature, but it's like the sense of belonging, right? The acceptance. It just was something very unique. Like, I never thought about my skin color when I was a little girl. That
Mm-hmm.
wasn't a thing. You know what I'm saying? And it was a blessing because everybody was beautiful, brown, and confident, and we had our own uniquenesses. We all, I'm tall. I was tall and skinny at the time. And so, that was the beauty in me. Then you had the short, little, cute, curvy, petite girl. But all of us were like black, right? We could talk about hair. We could talk about, clothing and fashion in a way that made you identify your uniqueness in a space of just really embracing blackness. And
Mm-hmm.
so, with that being said, it was a joy, growing up in Baltimore, Charm City at the time, and all of my friends just being an array of just, black girls and guys. I never doubted who I was. I never felt like I couldn't, even though, we didn't have a lot in our communities, right? There was an abundance of love, right?
Yeah.
Of knowing, of confidence, joy about, even when you think about going to a football game or a basketball game, right? You're amongst your peers, you're celebrating your culture,
Yeah.
music, and you always have this thing where you really know yourself. In contrast, where, I have cousins who grew up, in predominantly white communities, and they had phenomenal educations, specifically around my black female cousins. I noticed that they struggle with some self-esteem issues that just aren't even a factor for me, because nobody looked at me and said, "Oh, Crystal, your hair should be straighter, your skin should be lighter, you should,
Yeah.
you know, more
Yeah.
acceptable." You know what I'm saying? So for me, it just gave me this undeniable belief in who I am that transcended into me pursuing my dream in
and,
network news.
and in those formative years, those early years, it's a blessing to have that, because the erosion that occurs, like you said, it can stick with you forever. I was an administrator for a private school in a predominantly white area in Potomac. For those of you all who know Housewives of Potomac and all of that,
Mm,
and I said I was going to write a book. I may get back to it, but it was from kindergarten to eighth grade, and
mm-hmm,
you could, Crystal, I could see the deterioration between, and it happened between, like, by third grade and fourth grade for some,
mm,
the light was gone, but they
mm,
came in first and second, I mean kindergarten and first grade, bubbly eyes and little
mm,
black girls, like, hey, this
yeah.
the BlackPrint, so we're gonna keep it all the way black real. But they came in little black girls with their charisma and their
Mm,
sass and their, and
mm,
year by year, day by day, it was zapped out of them, to the
mm,
point that young girls, by the time they were seventh and eighth grade, your Briannas, your Katrinas, the girls that who would have been the most popular at
mm,
schools that you and I probably went to, would have been the most sought after, became like the Robin to a little white girl's Batman version, if you know what I mean. They were
mm,
like the hook on their arm. Oh my gosh, Gretchen, he thinks you're so cute, and like living vicariously through them. And I
mm,
now have adult friends who went to similar schools and similar settings, and they still struggle with the same, and we'll get to business, but just on a personal level, and like, we friends for real, right? Like,
right, right,
I've
right,
never I've never walked into a room and wondered if I would attract the attention of male or female
right.
individuals, where these women are beautiful, well
Mm-hmm.
educated, articulate, and they doubt themselves on levels that I've got to credit Detroit, baby, the big D.
The D, the D.
Honey, like, we got the B and the
Mm,
D up in here.
mm-hmm,
I
mm-hmm,
have to give kudos to Detroit for, like you said, letting me know that I was in safe spaces and I was beautiful and there was nothing I could do. And I didn't have this constant hum of criticism and unworthiness in my
Mm,
formative years
mm,
that allowed me to be the confident individual that I am now in ways that I didn't even realize until I became an adult and started moving into spaces where I was the minority. I could move,
mhm.
maneuver it because I had a core that was like, okay, this is different. Like, I
Yeah.
don't know where they from, but I am the ice in iced tea, baby. Like, yeah. So,
Mm,
uh, taking that concept, let's transition from you in West Baltimore planning your dreams. Decide, how did you get into media? Because media was the first space
mm.
that you kind of took over. How did we
Yeah.
get Crystal in Baltimore at the football games to Crystal at Fox News?
Mm. Now that's a journey, right? And
Yeah.
I'm going to give you the consolidated version because I think that's the part about being in certain communities now. The beauty of it, right? The confidence building, the relentlessness, the fearlessness that comes from being in those spaces is amazing. But
Mm,
like I know, if you want to transition into corporate and certain spaces, relationships are critical.
mm-hmm.
Right, relationships are critical, and more oftentimes than not, our communities look like our next door neighbor. And I didn't
Yeah.
have journalists next door, right? I didn't have corporate board members, where I could not go to get on a golf cart and go to their house, whatever. So it was a journey, right? I think that is one of the things where we can thrive as a community if we reach back strategically and like map our networks, right?
Mm,
We think about our children wanting to go into certain spaces. We do need to take a playbook from the US majority and look at how they navigate these spaces. And so when we use terms like nepotism and things like that, and we make it look bad when we talk about players like LeBron James, that's silly. This is what the majority has been doing for centuries in America,
yes.
is utilizing their network, right? And I believe in demonizing networks. We actually, it's a detriment to us because we have to have our network to propel. And so we need to get out of our spaces and move around. But to answer your question, I had a crazy journey. So when I came out of college, I went to HBCU all day. So I went from Black High School, Dunbar Senior High School, to historically Black College and University in Maryland. And then I went to law school in Texas at another historically Black college, Texas Southern University. So
Oh, she black.
But it's interesting because my brother, who is more in the arts and he's classically trained, has sung with folks like Pavarotti, studied, opera in Italy. His experience was completely different than mine. Even though we both grew up in Baltimore, grew up in the same house, my brother went to the School for the Arts, which was very diverse,
Mhm.
all ethnicities in the School for the Arts. Then he went to a PWI for college. So his experience was completely different from me. He had a tight knit group of friends at his PWI, but it was nothing like my experience. Like, I mean, it was colorful, it was fruitful, but all that to say, I wasn't in access of the network like my brother. Meaning, my brother was flying to Italy and Japan and all these other places going to a PWI just because of the
Mhm.
access, right, that was provided in those spaces. And while he faced racisms, right, and biases that I didn't face, he still had a different level of access. So for me, my journey into getting to my dream job was overcomplicated. That's the first thing. It was overcomplicated, right? And it took a lot of failure, a lot of loss. But long story short, when I came back from Houston, Texas, again, like I said, I was in law school. I was going through this crazy depression.
Mm.
Didn't finish law school. Knew that law was kind of like a fallback, predictable thing. But I knew as early as 15 years old that I wanted to be a journalist. God rest her soul. Ananda Lewis was the girl who I used to watch on BET TV. Oh
Wow.
yeah, because she was tall, she was brown, she was skinny. Same archetype as me, right?
Mhm.
She was like one of the first young Black women that I saw hosting cultural conversations that really changed my life. Like when I saw her interviewing Tupac and Jada Pinkett and all of these, I was like, yo, this is what I want to do. That was 15 years old, but I had no clue that she was a journalist. I didn't even know what it was called. I just knew she had a show,
Yeah.
you know? And so I took the long route. So long story short, when I came back from Houston, Texas, um, I was going through this depression. I was taking this class um, through the state. I was on unemployment. See, this is the thing about, people don't like to talk about the real story,
Come
right?
on.
But the real story is what makes, Black people so amazing, so resilient. But it is like the Black print for success, right? And it's so amazing how we can navigate life's failures, right? And create this like hodgepodge of experiences that just makes us dynamic, right?
Yes.
In the midst of my mess, being on unemployment, I was taking a class called the Women Entrepreneurs of Baltimore, and it was a diversity initiative. So it had men and women who like co-own businesses together, and it was a gentleman in my class named Dave Zake. He was creating this publication called Seeing Baltimore. Him and a gentleman named Mike Gwynn, and so it was like a digital online lifestyle publication.
Mm-hmm.
He comes into class one day. He says, "Crystal, oh my God." Um, I booked the interview with some of the Baltimore Ravens. I need a host. And I was like, well, they rich and fine,
Come on now, tell the truth, shame the devil.
and I'm beautiful and broke, right? And so I said, well, let me just go out here and host, this conversation. Girl, it was a mess. But the crazy thing about destiny and how it chases you is, if something is for you, it's for you. And if you think about it enough, you dream about it enough, you almost can invite these things into your space, right? And I could literally
Mm-hmm.
still see myself being a journalist, living my dream, but just didn't know how. So when Dave came in class that day and invited me to interview some of the Baltimore Ravens, my very first interview ended up being with Ray Lewis, Super Bowl MVP. Okay, very first interview. That interview got posted on YouTube, got over 80,000 views on YouTube, and then all of now, mind you, when you talk about delivery, horrible. Because
That
I had
now
no
that you have
training.
your professional insights, but
Correct.
I'm sure
But
for
girl, I
showing
was
up
just
your first day,
no cute. I was just cute. I was just cute. Okay, let's be clear. I was just cute. I had my little fur on. I was doing my thing at Full Moon Barbecue. But anyway, after that interview and starting getting traction, other Ravens started inviting me out to host their events. Terrell Suggs would have a sickle cell fundraiser, all of these different things. Ed Reed, and I was like, yo, this is like it, right? And so it really clicked for me when I was hosting. I think it was Terrell Suggs' event. Um, a girlfriend of mine, one of my best friends at the time, she came out, because we girls, I'm gonna invite my homies out, we gonna party, we gonna have a good time while I'm
uh-huh.
working, and she saw me in action and she said, B, you are in your zone, and I never forget her saying that. And in that moment, it clicked like, Crystal, this is your dream. You need to really pursue it. And so now I'm grown. I have some life experiences. I found a broadcasting school in Baltimore called the Broadcasting Institute of Maryland. Robin Quivers, Howard Stern's co-host, she went there. So a lot of names came out of this broadcasting institute, and so I was running my business that wasn't making no money in the daytime. I was going to broadcasting school midday. And then at night, I was interning at WJZ, Channel 13, in their sports department under Mark Viviano because, I had this experience in sports from doing, the football lifestyle interviews. And then, sports ran late at night, so I could intern after my day. And so I was
Mm.
having like 14, 16-hour days. And that's when I just pursued my dream. So, long story short, well, not even short, but long story, you know, it was the way it was supposed to be, you know like I don't regret anything about my journey. I'm very grateful that I didn't go into journalism directly out of college. One, because I would have been too young and dumb and impressionable. I would have been in a smaller market, chasing storms or something in South Carolina, which I
Uh-huh.
wasn't trying to do. you know but what I had made up in my mind in that season of interning and going to broadcasting school, and I was in my mid-20s, mid to late 20s at the time, I said, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to go to one of the top markets in the US. That was either New York, LA, or Chicago. I wasn't going anywhere else. It had to be top three. And I sent out over 300 resumes. And I got a call back from Fox after hounding them many, many times. And my very first job in
Come on
news
now.
was network news. So I went from intern not only to network news, but the number one market and the number one cable news network in the nation. And
Yeah.
so, it is a very non-traditional story of getting into journalism. But it really was making that conscious decision and like my dream chasing me and then me embracing my dream. Right.
Yeah. I call it the flow. I call it the flow. It
Mm,
you've got to get into your current. You've got to get into your
mm,
current and your Nipsey Hussle, one of his very many great quotes, but one that I always use is you can either fight with the rocks or you can roll with the river. And many of us are fighting
mm,
with the rocks in life
mm,
and not just realizing that everything about me is screaming that this is my zone, this is my lane, this is where,
mm,
like it's my superpower, as I
mhm,
call it. But I love you pointed out some key things. But one, I want to really point out to our audience and our community the power of our networks, being intentional about our networks, and to hear you reflect on a time when you didn't have a strong network. When I know your book, the network that you have now, it is just so powerful
mm,
because and then the other point that you made was about your journey. So I really want us to highlight and for someone to take away, like, don't sleep on your relationship building. Don't sleep on who you know or who just like a phone call away, who they know, because we have powerful individuals. We have key gatekeepers or people that
mm,
could point us in certain directions. And then another thing I'll say about a network is for those of us who have our own platforms or who have a level of expertise, you know who you are. Be a healthy supportive network for others as well too. Like
mm.
I love that about you, because you're always open to sharing and letting people in. Y'all know I am. I like anything I know I'm sharing. But with talking about the network and not allowing people who use that very system, like you talked about nepotism and all, they use the networking system, but sometimes make our community feel like that's a bad thing. Like, oh, you just gonna hook them up, you just gonna hire family. I work with hundreds of business owners, and all of them, that are successful, hire family or have a system
Mm,
that is already kind of predetermined individuals that will be in their smaller circle. So don't sleep on that. And that is an area that our community could really improve on. Partnerships, networking, things of that nature. We really can improve in that area. Last thing I love is how you told your true story. And I talk about being in the trenches. I talk about, leaving a job and family thinking I'm crazy. Like, you left a good job with three
that good
kids
old
to
job.
travel. But I needed every bit of that.
Mm,
I needed the bitter, the sweet, the salty, the savvy, all of that to make me
mhm.
Madam CEO without
Absolutely.
without unemployment scares, without eviction notices on my doors. There's no way
Mm,
that I could share with anyone the power of legacy. That is why legacy building is so important to me, because
mm,
I've had like the light daylight scared out of me a whole lot of times in life, thinking it all was going to collapse. And I had to figure
mm,
out, okay, how do I avoid this feeling? So thank you for sharing
mm,
that leg of your journey. So now
mhm,
you're in tech. I mean, now you're in media at this point. You're making
mhm.
moves. Tell how you transition, and at some point, even if it's not in this one, tell how. I can't wait to hear our story of ways that I may have inspired or
Mm,
just supported you along the way. But let's talk
mhm,
media to tech. Where did that
mhm.
change or pivot come in for you?
So, long story short, no matter where you go on your journey, you have to have a vision for your life, right? Like, you
Mm,
have to know where you want this to go and grow to. And in that vision, though, you do have to be flexible, right? And saying not that you won't achieve the goal of the vision, but you need to really understand for yourself that it may not look the way you want it to look. Okay.
yeah, yeah.
And
And
that's
more
the truth.
oftentimes it doesn't. But
It
the
never does.
picture often looks better in the end. You like, oh,
Mm,
I didn't see
mm,
that,
I
but
can see
I'm
that.
glad,
Mhm.
like, yeah.
For sure. And I think that's the part about being present, in these journeys, because everybody's focused on the goal, the goal, the goal, but like really being present in the moment is critical. Like really embracing, like I am actually doing this thing, right? Like I'm
Hmm.
living my dream. Most people never. 99% of the population will never live their dream, right? So,
Yeah.
in living your dream and pursuing your gifts, embrace the moment and be present in that. And so, for me, when I went into network news, my vision was to have a primetime show, like, to be able to host and be sitting at the desk and delivering, not necessarily news, because I'm not a news girl, but I wanted to really have feature conversations that really was around lifestyle inspiration. And
Hmm.
so, of course, where I was, strategically positioned in network news, one, I'll say this. What people need to also understand, because I got criticized a lot for going to Fox News, right? Whether it was the whether it
You
was the
know my
whispers in the
life.
back. Correct. Right. It was whispers in the background, or what are you doing there? And what I knew was strategically, when you think about competition, right? Beautiful black women are everywhere, hands down. That's just what it is. Right.
Yeah.
So me going to a BET or, CNBC, you know, even I applied to those networks, God told me no. It wasn't me saying no. Like I applied to those places and it was like, no, that's not where you're supposed to be. And so when I got to Fox as the only black woman in my newsroom for a decade, literally, I was a rock star. I got opportunities that I probably wouldn't have gotten at other networks. I was mentored at the time by the CEO of the company, which most folks never even meet the CEO of their
Uh-huh.
company. And I think one thing that I realized even from being in news was no matter what it looked like on the front end, right, the lack of diversity thereof, on the back end, the majority of newsrooms, I believe the statistic is 77% of all newsrooms are all white men over the age of 45, all of them. So even if you see black folks on the front side, they're not on the back end in
Yeah.
executive role. They're not in the back end running the cameras. They're not producing the content. They're not writing the stories. And so we can be in this delusion that, American media is diverse, but it's just not, right? It's just
It's
not. And I'm
not.
talking about aspects of it, right?
Yeah.
Front end, back end, corporate, business, partnerships, sponsorships, all of that, right? Advertising, legal, you take it, you name it. So for me going into Fox, I knew that, and my brother gave me this gem though because he had lived it from being
Mm.
in his PWI experience. He said, sis, don't go into Fox being the defender of the black race. He said, go into Fox being you and being excellent.
Wow.
Listen,
Wow.
it blessed me because so many arguments or confrontations or demeaning things that I could have engaged in, my spirit was protected in it because I would hear certain things in the backdrop and I'd be like, they fools, they clowns, they ignorant. They not talking about me. They talking about some other random isolated
Yeah.
experience they've had with black people, but they're not talking about the black people that I know. The black and brown women that I went and men that I went to college with, that I grew up with, that they're not addressing my community. So a lot of the things that a lot of us get caught up in corporate that really truly hallelujah, that really and truly breaks us down, right? I was strategically and emotionally protected from those things just from
Wow.
that, because in my excellence I couldn't be denied. Right, in my excellence, I was able to open up the doors for others because my reputation preceded me. And so when I would bring, and I increased diversity in my division by 85%, because anytime a story opened up, I wasn't looking at race, I was looking at who was in my Rolodex. And so when I would look at my Rolodex and say, okay, Crystal, um, okay, Crystal, you need a corporate attorney to talk about this story. I didn't care what color they were. I just knew that they were qualified. And so for me, being able to bring those folks into those spaces, it enabled me to increase diversity by 85%. But all of that to say, it was a beautiful blessing. Now, while there were some things where you might feel isolated from time to time, because I say, I want to get invited to the baby shower too. But what I understood about growing up all black was that we create communities that look like us, right? This is just who we're comfortable with. And
Yeah.
so um, more oftentimes than not, do I believe that the lack of invitation was intentional? Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. I didn't really care, honestly, QB. I just knew I wasn't invited and I was fine with it. Right. And so, but as far as struggling with things like imposter syndrome, I couldn't, because it goes back to that experience as a young woman where it's like, how could I be an imposter when this is a space that I created? you know,
Yeah.
you know, corporate America was built on the backs of Black people. And so I can't be an imposter in a space that I built, that I was the equity that backed the investment,
Come on
right? How
now.
could I be? And so for me, I didn't struggle with those things that a lot of my other Black colleagues in white spaces struggle with, because of my experience, right? Because of my confidence, because of my knowing of my greatness and my Blackness. And so, it was a dynamic experience, right? It did feel lonely sometimes, just because I was away from the community that I grew up
Yeah.
with. But I mean, I just was so focused on living my dream, that it just was a blessing. Now, I'm in West Africa right now. My computer is like going crazy, and I'm trying to
Yeah.
charge it. Can you go with? I'm gonna kill my camera for 1 second. Q. I'm sorry. I'm gonna plug in somewhere, and then I'm gonna come
No
pop. I'm
worries.
not gonna pop
And I'll chat it up while you're away.
out. Okay.
Yeah. So, like Crystal said, she is in Africa right now doing her thing. One of the things I do want to chat on that she spoke about was being in spaces and not allowing yourself to get drugged into being the uh, representing or having to fight for all things Black, right? Pick your battles, but know that we can show certain communities, we can show that, like, well, I know you believe you know what my community looks like. I know you believe you know how my community moves, but I'm going to show you, like a different way that we move, or just a real life example of how we move and how we win. I know for me, Crystal talks about getting that piece of advice from her brother. But for me, I grew up in Detroit and was surrounded by loving Black communities, Black professionals, Black family members who were doing their doggone thing, right? My grandmother, who I speak about often, did amazing things in the government and with real estate and things of that nature. But when I went to a PWI, a Christian PWI, that was life changing for me. And that is where I kind of scraped my knees and learned that, you know what, I cannot pick up the torch and fight and bring facts to all things ignorant in this particular community, because it was a whole lot of ignorant stuff that was just said, or things that I was just like, do they not see me here? Do they not, like, what was I not just the head of the debate team? Did I not just write, like an award winning article for the newspaper, and like all of these great things that I was doing in college? And like Crystal said, like, I'm living my dream at the time. I'm doing all of these amazing things, and people still saying crazy stuff about, like me or the Black community and things of that nature. I will never forget. And I started as an education major, and the school that I went to was in Tennessee, Nashville, Tennessee. I'm not going to put them on blast, but if y'all research enough, you might be able to figure out what school I was at. But education major, we're preparing to do our practicums and going out into the field. This school is like, I am a fly in the milk here, right? But it is what it is. I loved the school. I loved everything that they had going on. I was, like building new networks, like Crystal mentioned, and things of that nature. But the first day of our practicum, our the director of education calls us to the auditorium. It's about 100 or so of us students, right? And she's like, you're going into urban areas. Know that these children are vicious. They're hungry. Leave your purses. If you can leave them in your dorms, if you're here, great. If not, put them in the trunk of your car before you leave and die. Like, just all of this. And my mind was blown. Like, one, like, I'm from a fairly urban community, and if the mamas around there didn't do nothing, the kids was eating. Like, I don't care if it was oodles and noodles, baked beans, and an old lamb chop, from where she had a date the night before. Like, but I didn't see any kids digging in the trash where I'm from. And there was poverty around, crime around, all types of stuff, like we might have had some chips and a Fago or something like that, but we wasn't digging in trash cans, nor were people who because my family was a little more so middle class in the hood. It's kind of hard to say middle class, but long story short, that but I was so amazed to be in these spaces, and the way that they thought about people who looked like me and came from communities like me, and they were unapologetic about sharing these types of things. So I'm going to wrap up and then transition it back over to you. So for Crystal, she had her brother who gave her insight on, hey, don't carry that burden. Me, I had to learn that in college, that I can either fight every inappropriate statement, I can fight every ignorant comment that people make, or I can show you better than I can tell you that I am a winner, and I can make your comments and make you essentially look dumb as hell, because it's like everything that you're saying that you think about my community or whatever, I'm proving something different. So I love that she shared that, because although we do need, sometimes you got to address certain things. But I thank God that I learned in my early 20s that, I don't have to fight everything, I don't have to fight every comment, like with my words, or getting caught up in, or distracted by being the token. If they want to believe that, so be it. But I had about 2 or 3 core things that, like, you wasn't going to try me on that. However, I definitely learned the art and the value of showing people that my community does things differently than you believe. We are exceptional. We are, you want to mimic and do what I do. So if that's the case, how can you still believe all of the foolishness that you're throwing out there? But welcome back. We know you're in Africa making moves, switching it up. So we appreciate all that you do. I just dived into one of the points that you made about the tip that your brother gave you, which I thought was so phenomenal. And I just shared that I didn't have that tip going in. I came from an all Black community, an all Black high school, like an all Black city. And I went down south to college to an area where I was for the first time a true minority. And I learned in college that, like, I can't fight all. It's too much ignorance.
It's too much.
It's too much ignorance for me to get caught up in every argument, and so on and so on. So, but we're gonna kick it back to you to just to continue sharing with us how you went from media to tech, and that portion of that leg of your journey.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And thank you, Quintaria. And I heard some pieces of your story, which, it's like, hey, I'm not going to engage in that. And so for me, I hit the point in my career probably around 2016. 2016, I wrote my first book.
Yes.
Right. And, it did really well. And at that point, I started to get like engagement from other networks, like, hey, we want you to come on the show and talk about the extraordinary, do an inspirational segment. And because I was still at the time mentored by the CEO, I had a lot of freedom to go and do those segments and speaking engagements from the United Nations to just Congressional Black Caucus. So I was blessed in that way. And then when the CEO was removed, which he was, from the organization.
She said, which he was. You don't have to take my word for it. He was.
He was, right? He was removed. Things started to shift, right? New leadership, as we know in corporate, things started to change. And so one of my best allies and advocates, going back to your network, was now gone, right? I found myself answering questions that I didn't have to answer in the past. I found the organization challenging, my opportunities that were rightfully owed to me. Because the thing was, in news, I was my role was as a producer, which I had to fight for that title. That's a whole nother conversation. But I was not hired as talent, right? Even though I was on 1,300 stations with my news feature and my national podcast, I was not talent. So contractually, I had the freedom to do other things outside of the network where a lot of people are restricted if they are hired as talent, right? So I was
Mm-hmm.
doing the talent aspects of my role, and this we talk about putting in the work in addition to, right? It wasn't like I was getting paid to be talent. I was getting paid to be a producer. So anything that I did talent wise was in addition to the work.
Mm-hmm.
But then when the organization started to try to inhibit me from living my dream and fulfilling my dream, I said, oh no, oh, this ain't it, right? Like, you're not going to tell me that I can't go on to a network and talk lifestyle, self help when that's not our competitive market, right? Like, we
Mm-hmm.
were strictly, we're news, we're political
Yep.
organization. So why can't I go and have this conversation on, let's say, you know, with Mel Robbins show, right? Let's just say, right? And so I knew at that point that was an inflection point for me that, okay, Crystal, this is a shift happening, right? That's when pivot is critical, and you may need to figure out another way to navigate your dream to get to the bigger dream of a network show. So after multiple conversations about, Crystal, we need people to do politics and that just not be in my lane, I had made up my mind, well, ultimately I'm going to leave, right? What does that mean, or what did that mean? I had no clue. But one day, this main story to get to tech,
Yeah.
this would be about 2019. It was right before the pandemic hit. It was in December 2019. News broke at the White House. I did the unthinkable. I had went to the restroom right before news broke, gone maybe 3 minutes from my desk. When I came back, my senior editor was like running around like a crazy person. He's like, Crystal, where did you go? We need a guest for anchor coverage. And at that point, I was fed up. I was tired of being there. And in that moment, I said, these people can't even book a guest without me physically being in my seat, you know?
Come on now.
And that day I went and found a guest, got him on air as I normally did to cover the political story at the White House. And I sat at my desk like almost in tears, honestly, Quintaria. And I said, God, why do you still have me here? Like, why am I still coming in here every day, doing the hustle and bustle when I know that I've kind of reached the pinnacle of my career in this newsroom specifically? And God was like, because I want you to automate your job.
Mm.
So this was pre-pandemic, right? We had never worked remotely. And when I say, never, meaning they would put us in hotels near Rockefeller Center so we could walk into work if it was really bad weather. Like, they thought we physically had to be in the newsroom, right?
Yeah.
Spending the millions of dollars. And what was revealed in that time was, Crystal, you're going to automate your job, but can that happen? Right? Like, we weren't even using Zooms for live news feeds. We
Yeah.
were still using ISDN connections. And
People
so,
forget that the pre-COVID mentality. Like,
oh,
so now 5 years later, when people are appalled by having to
going
be
in,
somewhere physically,
right?
it's like it's been half a decade
Mm,
since that was a reality. When waking
absolutely.
up, getting dressed, like making that
Commute,
carpool or whatever,
correct.
handling that commute was a
Hmm.
very real reality.
It was
And
just the truth.
yes, and employers did not, employers nor employees. We did not let somebody take off in your quad or in your, like you like unplanned
Hmm.
vacation like that. Like we really could not
Hmm.
conceptualize the beauty of automation or that you could work remotely like we
Hmm.
do now.
Absolutely. And I can say, but also the beauty of being in network news when we had to be in the newsroom is that network that we talked about. I literally have been like on the elevator with Mark Cuban. You understand what I'm saying? Like, so being in those spaces, it just created an environment of, you wanted to get dressed up, you wanted to own your vibe and your
Hmm.
energy, right? And so it was a blessing to be in that space. But when that download came to me, automation was not a thing. We weren't logging in remotely and all of that kind of stuff. So it was still kind of like, well, how do you do this? Like, how do you
Hmm.
build this thing? And so it truly was blind faith, right? I just went back to my desk that day, like I mentioned, and I wrote down 8 pages of notes of how I did my job. And I just looked at it for months, honestly. I looked at it for months. And then boom. So that was December 2019. March 2020, we went fully remote, right? Fully remote. And I remember leaving the newsroom and thinking, oh, oh, this is why my job needs to be automated,
Hmm.
and still not knowing how to do it. And then I think the main inflection point was around George Floyd. Um, when the story, and I have been through every major social impact movement in news from Trayvon. I've interviewed Trayvon Martin's mother. I've interviewed Eric Garner's mother. I've had the blessing to have, and share all of their stories in one way or another. And, but when everything happened with George Floyd, I remember being, now mind you, we were working remotely at the time because I think that was June of 2020. I
Mm-hmm.
remember looking at all of the interpretations of George Floyd's story across network news, and all of them were re-traumatizing Black people
You ain't
consist-
never lied.
consistently, and there was almost a level of like, it almost felt like I want to remind this community um, of where they sit in the power dynamic in the US. And I remember watching that and saying, yeah, how long am I going to participate in this? Right.
Mm.
And then also, I had an inspirational news feature, and I could have had the opportunity to propel positive messages during that time that would inspire Black, brown, white, yellow, orange, and green people. And there was no effort to promote that work, right? And so
Mm.
when I say I was hosting a national news feature, I was writing, booking, hosting, and producing the entire newscast myself, right? And with no support. And I remember, and Fox was like the distribution channel. And I just remember saying to myself, okay, Crystal, yeah, you about to have to go, right? And where you come in is, I remember this clearly. We were talking, it was December of 2020. I said, yeah, Q, I think I'm gonna build this thing. And you were like, well, girl, you gonna have to get out of there because if you build it while you're still in news, they're
Come
gonna
on
own it.
now. Come on
They're gonna
now.
own it.
That's where
And
my strategic mindset comes in.
the
Yeah,
strategic Brunson
yeah,
approach.
yeah. And
Yeah.
understanding business
Mm,
and understanding your intellectual rights and your intellectual property and all of that. I loved the direction you were going, but I saw
mm.
red flags everywhere. Like, hold on, friend. Hold
Listen,
on.
and
Yeah.
you said, friend, you need to not go into a new tax year. This was your exact language. You need to not go into a new tax year working at Fox. You like
Y'all
you
know
need
I
to.
don't play about them taxes. But the 65 tax codes I know you're not using. The book is somewhere. My team will drop it. I don't play about them tax codes, y'all.
For real. And when you said that, I was like, yo, and I remember like it was maybe about a week after that. I just said, I was actually, because everybody knows my birthday's in December. I usually take off the last 2 weeks. I never work on my birthday in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I was on vacation and I woke up and I remember going to the gym and going to get coffee, and the sun was up. Now, a lot of people don't know, in that glamorous news life, I used to have to be in the newsroom at 4 a.m. every day. So when I used to get into work, the sun had yet to come up, right? So, and I remember having this epiphany like, oh my God, the sun is up. Like the birds are chirping. And I was like, I'm done. And I sent the email from my phone to my VP at the time and my direct report. I said, hey guys, I just want to can we get on a call? I need to talk. And they got back to me really because I was a good employee, right? They got right back to Crystal. Is everything okay? Are you good? I was like, yeah, I'm fine. I just need to talk to you guys. And so we got on the call, and I was like, I just want you guys to know that December 31st will be my last official day at Fox News. It's been a great journey. And they're like, oh my God, well, is something happened? And I was like, no, it's just time. It's just time. And I love the way that it ended because, to be able to keep the relationships intact, right? I didn't want to be bitter or angry or resentful because what I know about destiny in life is that you control it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, we can make and say, oh, the system is this and this and that. But at the end of the day, right, as controllers of our own destiny, right, we truly have faith in the vision for our lives. We know that we are in control ultimately. And I wanted to maintain that control. I didn't want people to continue to like pick away at my legacy that I had created at Fox to where it would be diminished. I didn't want anybody to, and when you find yourself like becoming someone that you're not, showing up late, rolling out of bed, going to work, not doing your hair before you leave out,
Uh-huh.
that's when you got to do a self check and say, is it really about the organization, or is it that I have reached the point in my career where I've done what I needed to do? uh, I remember Russell Westbrook. I got to interview him once for NBA All Star. The time he won MVP for NBA All Star,
Mm-hmm.
I interviewed him before he did that. And Westbrook said to me, he said, "You have to focus on the task at hand and the goal that you want to accomplish." He said that before he went out there and killed it that night, and was like, I think he had like 42 or 52 points in the game. Like he just did his thing, and I was honored to interview him. But that's something that stuck with me forever. Was that you have to know what you're focused on, the
Mm-hmm.
task at hand, and the goal that you want to accomplish. And if you look back over your career and you've done it, even though I never had my primetime network show at Fox, I was on 1,300 stations nationwide. I had producers in markets like Idaho and South Dakota call me after
Mm-hmm.
D. Watkins. He has a book called Living and Dying While Black in America. They heard that interview on national news and they picked up the phone and said, Crystal, oh my God, I didn't know that this was happening to young black boys in Baltimore City, where they would be made to lay face down on the concrete just for playing a game of basketball and literally being like dehumanized. And so when you do the work and you actually be present and acknowledge that you actually accomplish the task, right? You focused at the task at hand and the goal that you want to accomplish, then you can have peace and moving on. So that's how I transitioned out. And when I made a decision to leave in December 31st of 2020, then I went to the Dominican Republic for 3 months, cleared my mind, and started to figure out how to build Evo.
Yeah, yeah. I will say, I remember having the conversation with you. I was getting on an elevator when I was speaking the words like sis, and then and what I love is success loves speed. So
Mm,
when you circle back in less than 2-3 weeks, like you, I took your
come
advice
on.
and I moved for I was success loves speed and people
Mm,
going back to like how I said that current, that flow,
mm, mm,
currency, it loves movement. So I was
mm,
like, oh yeah, my girl
mm,
is on to something. And another
mm,
thing too is we cannot be defined by these good jobs and these people that believe that that like, oh, we're treating you well. Why ever would you leave? When I left the last corporate job that I have, I was an administrator, high up for that private school I was telling you that was destroying our black children. But they were like, "You're leaving? How
mm,
could you? Like we pay you well." And I'm
mm.
like, and,
Like,
and,
shut
and,
up.
and and I had laid out so many egregious things that had happened to me on that watch. I had taken them like and I don't want to say much because money was involved to keep me from saying something, but we good though, it worked out. But I will say I brought them. I took them out of red spaces and brought them multi-million-dollar programs, built them up
Mm,
so much. And when I came to them professionally and was like, "Hey, it's time for me to," they were like, "But we're good to you. Like how like." We're good to you.
mm,
How dare you leave? You do not be defined by anything. Like you said, know the task at hand. I knew
mm.
in my last 2 years at my last corporate job, like I am physically working for them, but I am building my business. So
That's it.
every account that I secured, every new program that I rolled out, I knew it was for my future business. And in
Mm,
2014, I began the shift. 2016, I launched my company, and the rest has been history. It has been up and stuck, as Cardi B would say, ever since then.
it's up. It
No,
is up.
yeah, thank you. When it's up, then it's so. I definitely want to make sure that our community understands that we look for signs to pivot. I want to say reclaim the narrative. Life
Mm,
does not cancel your calling. So Crystal and I have talked about unemployment, eviction notices, you name it.
mm,
Reclaim your narrative. Know that it almost as like a symphony is
mm,
what I'm kind of thinking. Like
mm,
every part of your life has a adds to the harmony, the flavor,
mm.
which is you. Use that. Audit
Mhm.
your assets, not just your failures. Even
Mhm.
when I'm coaching individuals, Crystal, far too many people want to focus on their failures. And I love your story when you share. I was living the dream, baby. She created a legacy and she took time to smell the roses, even when it was busy, chaotic. She's on a newsroom floor. God only knows
Mm.
how chaotic that was. But you at least knew the value of saying, but hold on. Even though I may not have achieved that, I'm here. I
Mhm.
popped up out of West Baltimore, baby, and I am up here in the number one news network. Like that. So that remember that audit your assets, not just your failures. I'm not saying
Mhm.
ignore places that we need to improve, but
Mhm.
finally, I want to say that pivot with purpose, not panic. So when I am certain, and I'm speaking for you a little bit, but I'm certain when Crystal and I were on the phone and she's talking about this great idea, we had business sessions and friendly conversations a bit working up to this. I'm sure when she said, "Well, Q, this is what I'm thinking," and when she brought me that bright idea, I doubted she thought, "Well, my girl gonna chop it up and say, sis, I hear what you're saying, but you got a dot, 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 dot." She took that information and she pivoted with a purpose. She didn't
Mm.
panic. She didn't, like in a knee jerking way, be like, "Oh, you's a hater. I'm gonna get off because I was coming from a place of love.
Mhm.
But far
Mhm.
too often we panic when our dream, or when our dream may appear as though it's not coming to fruition in the way that we thought
Mm.
it would, or and notice that we can package our pain. The people have been packaging the pain that we have gone through, our struggles, and making billions of dollars on it. That is
Mm.
why, like she said, if we pulled our pain in the form of dollars, we would be the 16th largest nation.
Mm.
We
In the
can
world.
repackage our stories. We
Mhm.
could repackage the pain, the stress, the all of these things, and we can automate it and come up with something dynamic like Crystal was able to do. We only got a couple more minutes, but I can't leave without you telling us about Vetify, EBO, all the wonderful things that you're doing for experts like myself. Crystal was one of the first people to had spoke at colleges, schools, communities. She was the first person to get me on a national platform. And I know, no, no, she has great things for our community to do the same for others as well.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad you pivoted to that because I mean, you are the archetype and something I wanted to propose to you, to your community as well, right? We'll create a code for you, right? So we have Vetify. Vetify is really about, it's subject matter experts who have the expertise, they have the domain knowledge, but they are not necessarily media ready just yet, right? So we actually own the US patent and trademark for vetting and verification for media readiness, right? So this is the thing about being
Yes.
in spaces, where you're doing work and you don't know what it looks like and just celebrating yourself. That scorecard, those 10 years of doing bookings and doing tedious work, right? It created a scorecard that my team of geniuses were able to automate, right? And so now we have that trademark for that. But long story short, Vetify allows you to get a media readiness score. And then after you get your media readiness score, you get access to a dashboard that will take those qualifiers and every place that you need improvement to say, this is how you can show up more visibly, how you
Mm,
can get the media bookings that you deserve. And we take you on an automated journey, right? And I really wanted to remove that barrier to entry because most people don't get to be on national platforms unless you have a relationship, right? Even if
mm-hmm.
you are phenomenal, right? A lot of small businesses or even underserved, underestimated, underrepresented businesses, because typically you're not making market rate, right? You have less revenue, less access to capital to be able to invest in a publicist that would be charging you $5,000 to $10,000 a month to get you in the door and to get you media ready, right? So that was one of the biggest thing I realized being a gatekeeper in news was that Crystal was in position to bring people in who deserved to be in, but they just didn't have the capital or the access to get in. So
Yeah.
I just wanted to automate that process. So that's what Vetify is. It's a product of EBO, our parent company. And so we get you vetted. and verified, and we get you media ready all on automation. And so QB, you and I will come up with a coupon code for your community if they want to actually,
Certainly.
yes, that'll be
Certainly.
because
Yes.
you know some dynamic entrepreneurs. You've coached so many people in your journey, right? You're building them up and you're creating businesses for them. What a lot of people don't know is that 72% of all entrepreneurs say their biggest hurdle to overcome in business is visibility. You
Yeah.
know, according to Forbes, 82% of startups fail not because of a poor product, but because of poor positioning. So we're using automation and intelligence and software solutions to be able to address it at scale. And so we're just excited, to get folks, just get folks out there. It's
I
a
love it. I love it.
mm,
I am always recommending Ebo. I'm always speaking about you and the work that you do. I love your story. I love you. Just like she's just a good person. Beyond a phenomenal story, because it's a lot of great stories out there, but they're not people that you would want to go to lunch with or check. Be like, girl, you in Africa? Well, let me check how long you gonna be? Can I fly out? Like Crystal
mm,
truly is one of those
mm,
people. So I applaud everything that you're doing. Yes, we must bring the Brunson approach, the BlackPrint and Vetify together, because we
mm,
have got to make sure that we intentionally open doors and we be the network that we would have loved to have,
mm,
along our journey in certain places. I'm committed to that. I know you're committed to that. And Tribe, we will definitely get that code and information out to you. Is there anything that you want to share in closing to tell
mm.
more about yourself, what you've done, and just to give just a bit more? I mean, you've inspired us the whole call, but give us an impactful closing as we wrap up today's the black session of the Black Print.
For sure. And thank you, Q, for having me. This has been a dynamic conversation. I needed it this morning. I would say for people, because we're living in interesting times overall, globally, my advice is just do it, right? It's like
Mm,
the Nike slogan, just do it, right? I don't care what society is saying. I don't care what the numbers look like. Just go into places where you might feel a little uncomfortable and gain and create your own comfort zone, right? If you have an idea, there's so many spaces where you can innovate today and so many AI solutions that you can automate it. Just do it, right? Because what I
certainly.
know from my journey is that, the only person that stops you from doing the greatness that you've been assigned to do is you, right?
Hmm.
You possess the power, you own your narrative, right? Anything that you dream of. And when I say that, I mean it. I was a little girl watching Teen Summit, Nanda Lewis, and I dreamed that I could be on radio and TV, and I did it. One day I'm in a newsroom and I get a divine download to build a software. I barely can do math. I can count my money, but I can barely do math, right? And
Yeah,
now
don't
I
play with my coins,
play with my
but
coins. I need my
yeah, but
coins.
don't give me a
Don't,
trigonometry.
correct. Don't give me no equations. I don't want them, right? At the end of the day, now I have an AI software company with no technical background, and I'm building it. It's growing, it's thriving. T. Rowe Price just, acknowledge us as one of the, social impact entrepreneurs, in the region. And so just do it, right? And once you do it, you will attract and align everything that God has for you.
Yes.
And that's where I would close. Let's not get caught up in the narrative of who's in office and what the statistics say. You can always be the exception to the rule because I'm a living example of it, and I'm just blessed to be here and where I am.
Ditto, ditto. Crystal Berger, the face, the brains behind Ebo and Vetify. We love you. We are proud of you. Know that we will drop information when we reshare this about our code. We'll share it with our community. Super excited. We have about 9,000 people active in our database that we have taught, coached, built
Mm.
scalable businesses for them. So y'all better be on the lookout.
Hey,
But yes, I know, right? Thank you so much. Crystal,
thank
I love you. You keep
you
doing
too.
amazing things. We will be in touch soon, but thank you for sharing
Mm.
today on the Black Print. And you all going to be great. And Crystal and I will do the same.